address the speaker again. Where did I'm sorry, right there, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. We all know about Japan, the discipline they carry in their work, and the tradition and the discipline they have and the dedication they have towards the indigenous people. But my question to the Japanese delegate, that we all know there is a company called JICA that works in many other countries, and in this session we have found many complaints against the company. So I would like to make one short notice that JICA have been working in the east of India, where I belong to. We are all indigenous people out there. Firstly, we are not defined what is indigenous people by the government of India. Secondly, JICA have been working in healthcare, industrialization, and infrastructure development. Recently, due to the malfunctioning and carelessness of JICA, many people have lost their life. And yesterday, a girl from a school, she's just a 17-year-old girl, due to the carelessness of JICA, have lost her life in the road accident. And last week itself, same incident for the carelessness of JICA, many families have lost their lives and the dear ones. And what can we do for such a careless?
We'll open the panel up for responses. Do I have any takers?
Yes, thank you very much for your question, and thank you very much for the important points that we should be aware of. And yes, we actually in Japan we have known, not only in India that you just described, but also for other jurisdictions. I think JICA or especially other relevant companies with respect to the JICA project or other project project in South Asian countries have some issues and claims that we are receiving, and some of them actually went to the NCP, National Contact Point, but NCP does not have any strict resolution mechanism in Japan at this moment. So I think we are still kind of in the phase of struggling to solve those kind of issues in an effective way. But at least I can say that as we just described here, or as Alina quickly mentioned, that we are trying to come up with some grievance mechanism in the Japanese community, so that we could have effective grievance and for the Japanese companies as well. So hopefully in the near future we could listen to very carefully what you just described, and we could solve those kind of issues effectively. But that's probably what I can say at this moment. But we are trying our best to improve as an entire community of Japan.
And the last question, right here, sir.
It's not a question, but I'm working at the PwC right now, but before that I worked at JICA, so I would like to respond to the question from the lady. And JICA has a guideline for environmental and social considerations, and also they have objection procedures. So you can contact that procedure if you have such grievance. Okay.
Thank you very much. So we're going to answer those questions. If there's time, we'll take one more, but otherwise, that'll wrap up our session today. I think the first one was to you again, Roy.
So thank you very much for the question about our progress. So I think of course guidelines are still soft law, so I think it's not a perfect solution, and the legally speaking, it can be ignored, of course. So I think not 100% of the companies are respecting guidelines, but I think it's having a very good impact, as I mentioned, to the large companies as well as the small companies. And I think the point is actually they set the local standards, in Japan, in the local ways, in the local languages, in the local approaches. I think that's probably the way that the reason why it's working well. Of course, it's basically in line with the UN guiding principle. Of course, there are some discussions whether this is really in line with the UN guiding principle, but basically overall it's in line with, and of course, UN guiding principle has been for the last more than 10 years, and but that itself did not, spread out into the Japanese community. But once it localized into the guidelines, I think it has a lot of, impacts, for, I think that kind of localization, the key, for this effective, the function. And also, recently, I think large companies are also very careful about their ESG, requirement by the institutional investors or analysts or other, kind of social, request. And for example, I also have received increase recently more from the analysts of the, the market or the institutional investors and how this guideline should be implemented in a Japanese listed company. And for the Japanese listed company, although it's not a mandatory requirement itself, I think probably from the viewpoints of the fiduciary duty of the directors of the large company, listed companies, I think, if it could be a fiduciary duty issue because, 90% of the companies in the same industry has the human rights due diligence. And then you are the company which does not have a human rights due diligence program and have some issues going forward. I think that may create the fiduciary duties under the Japanese Companies Act concept as well. So I think that kind of indirect pressure, but I think still setting a standard in Japan under the Japanese Companies Act concept, I think that was probably creating kind of indirect pressure for the large companies to respect soft laws.
Interesting. Sarah, I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm sorry, sir. Sarah?
Yes, thank you for the questions also because, the majority of our strategies are based on stakeholders consultations that we do on a regular basis. Actually, so we cannot do, our job without local stakeholders' support, without international organizations, without local NGOs, which have, the real numbers and which know, the context also beyond the business ecosystem. Because, as European Chamber of Commerce, of course, so we start from the business point of view, but we need also to look for a collective effort. And that's why, for example, on a regular basis, we want to organize sort of public-private dialogue event where we involve and invite to participate offices, from authorities from the government and also local NGOs and civil societies representatives, which have, specific expertise on specific topics that we want to address from an event to another. So, collective efforts and continuous consultations of all local stakeholders are a key driver of the Responsible Business Hub strategy.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I'm going to turn to Serenine now and ask her to either respond to any one of the questions and or just provide her concluding thoughts.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to circle back to the earlier question about the role of CSOs in the HRDD and similar engagements. I think that there are two things that are really helpful because HRDD is a process, right? It's an ongoing process. And we should not lose sight that all we want is really better outcomes, right? So it doesn't really matter if you have a lot of, checklists, so to speak, if the outcomes get worse, or really the same. So I would say that the first thing, and this is also taking the cue from the discussions that we had as part of our research with, human rights defenders in Thailand. So first is to engage more on the HRDD language. So for instance, in Thailand, people have said, well, maybe we can just come up with what the best practice grievance mechanism would look like, for a Thai company. What a best practice, meaningful engagement with communities and ethnic groups would look like prior to project development. So to give more clarity and more specific, I would say, guidance to the approach that business is about to take, because I think one challenge for the businesses is when they see HIDD is like a lot of different things across many different issues. So I think that, so first is to assist on more specific, like issue specific, especially in terms of what best practice really should look like. I think the second thing goes back to your earlier point about human rights washing or HIDD washing, which I think that this is a big risk, and we're maybe starting to see some of that in Thailand as well. So definitely CSOs as people who really work directly with the stakeholders and they're on the ground, I think you have a lot to bring to the table, about the instances that you would just identify as, this is human rights washing, or also the quality, assessing the quality of the human rights reports or indicators announced by companies. I think that this is something that would be really useful. So it may not be much different from the work that many CSOs are already doing, right? But just kind of putting it more in the language of the HRDD and the reports that companies start to produce, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarini. And Viesnat, I didn't warn you about this, but maybe you have some concluding remarks yourself. And feel free to respond to any of the questions or issues raised.
Yeah, I mean, the points, I think it also come out from our conversation today, is that the role of the local government into this HRDD process. I think, I mean, the concept came out of the fact that, probably more relevant in Asia, where local labor governance is substandard, if I would say. And this is an effort to use global supply chain strategies, as a ways to innovate, to circumvent the challenges that we have encountered at the national level. So the effort to really make it, like strategic theories and, like engage with the local jurisdiction, it probably complicates the process. So, to me, probably the perspective that, like make it like global supply chain strategy, make it very much involved with the company in the producing the sourcing country, and then of course engage with the private sector, engage with the worker in the global supply chain, and of course make an effort to get the state country to facilitate the process rather than like making use of, making it as an opportunity to use the national, local standard to, to interact with this instrument, I would say.
Interesting conceptual and still very practical suggestions on the way forward. We are over 12:30, the time limit now, by a couple of minutes, so I'm going to have to close it to questions and bring this session to a close. Just as a quick summary, some big themes came out. Readiness, of course, was a theme. That was one of the points of our session today. The readiness of companies in Cambodia and Thailand and Japan, but also concerns too that not all stakeholders would be involved or being involved at this point. And so, our labor unions, are the perspectives of other stakeholders going to be included in this human rights due diligence process? What does readiness actually mean? Companies need to be ready, in fact, to involve workers in greater measure. Another theme was clarity. Greater clarity is needed for next steps. We need to ensure that clarity comes from regulators, but also from indicators. But in tension with that, or in contrast to that, we need to avoid bureaucratic solutions and box-ticking exercises. We need to avoid the threat of human rights due diligence washing. Another theme, size matters. In terms of the effectiveness of incentives, big companies are ready for this. They have been ready. They've seen it coming down the line for some time. SMEs have fewer resources and fewer incentives. We'll need to start working more closely on that. And lastly, I like how Sarini ended her reflections with a focus on better outcomes. That's why this is why we're engaging in human rights due diligence. That's why some of us very much support CSDDD and other mandatory measures. Ultimately, we're looking for better outcomes, and that's going to involve a multi-stakeholder approach to mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence. Now, a couple themes that we did not talk about today. Notably, we did not bring in the environment on human rights and environmental due diligence. And that's a blind spot, rather, that we're going to shine a light on at our October 4 and 5 forum. We're going to focus much more on the environment, and indeed we'll talk about human rights due diligence there, and also the gendered view on human rights due diligence. To the extent that there is a perspective there, I'd like to see more unpacked under that heading. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for being here today, taking forward the messages you might have heard today, and congratulating with me our panelists on a fantastic session. Thank you so much.
I think it's an excellent session, and thank you for that summary. I was just going to say that, we kind of established that, of course, MHRDD is not a silver bullet, but it has definitely built a positive momentum towards stronger accountability. You covered many of the points that I was going to summarize, but I hope it is just not another washing opportunity or phenomena. So thank you very much for this excellent panel. I think just a couple of announcements here. We do have 3 side sessions right now during the lunch break. So the lunch break is 12:30 to 2 o'clock. The side session, mainstreaming human rights-based approaches at all level of fisheries management to end illegal fishing and forced labor at sea. Southeast Asia region is focus, is in the meeting room MRH. There's a session on indigenous sovereignty and just transitions in meeting room A, and there's a session actually on making human rights due diligence work for home workers, which I think is a really good continuation for a session from here in meeting room F. We will come back to the plenary upstairs in CR1, where the last plenary of the forum would be held just before the closing plenary, focusing on the disability rights in the business and human rights agenda. Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoy your lunch.